Onitsha market was more than a place of trade, it was the pulse of the city. Stalls overflowed with bright fabrics, baskets of peppers, dried fish, and gold jewelry that glistened under the harsh afternoon sun. The air carried the shouts of traders calling customers, the laughter of women bargaining, and the ever-present rhythm of commerce. To rule here was to hold power beyond politics, for fortunes were made and broken daily. Among the wealthiest traders was Obioma, a man known for his shrewdness and the vast empire of warehouses he controlled. Yet behind his success stood his wife, Adana, a woman who moved with quiet dignity. She was respected by other market women, admired for her poise, and known for her generosity to the poor. Many said Obioma was lucky, but few knew how much of his empire was built on Adana's sacrifices and subtle influence in the market. Obioma was a man of presence. Tall, with a commanding voice, he walked through the market surrounded by apprentices who carried ledgers and parcels. He dressed in the finest lace, gold chains glittering on his neck. Men envied him, women admired him, and his business associates respected him, though some whispered that his ambition was ruthless. Adana, his wife, had been with him since his early days, when he was just a struggling trader with a small stall by the roadside. She remembered nights when they counted profits by candlelight, eating roasted corn as supper. Now, with warehouses across the city and apprentices scattered through the market, Obioma had everything he once dreamed of. Yet Adana sensed a restlessness in him, a hunger that wealth could not satisfy. Behind Obioma's empire was Adana's patience. When customers grew suspicious of Obioma's deals, it was Adana who smoothed tensions with her calm voice. When apprentices threatened to quit, she persuaded them to stay with small gifts and kind words. She was the one who took money from her father's land to fund Obioma's first big consignment. Without her, his empire would have collapsed in its infancy, yet, despite her devotion, Adana felt invisible. Obioma rarely acknowledged her sacrifices in public. At banquets, he praised his business partners but seldom mentioned her. The market women knew her worth, but Obioma treated her more like part of his possessions, respected, but overlooked. Adana endured it in silence, believing that loyalty would one day bring her peace. It was in the chatter of the market that the first shadows appeared. Women whispered that Obioma's business trips to Enugu were too frequent. A trader from Enugu mentioned seeing him in places where no deal was happening. Adana dismissed it at first. After all, rumors traveled faster than harm, but the whispers grew louder. Apprentices stuttered when asked about his journeys. His returns were often late at night, his clothes carrying unfamiliar perfumes. Adana told herself it was business, that men like Obioma were always surrounded by distractions. Yet deep down, unease began to stir, a seed of doubt taking root in her heart. One night, as the harmattan winds whistled through their compound, Adana awoke to the faint sound of her husband's voice. Obioma was in the sitting room, speaking softly into his phone. She crept close enough to catch fragments, words like "my love," "soon," and "the children." Her chest tightened. Which children? Their children were asleep in the next room. When she confronted him in the morning, Obioma laughed it off. He claimed it was a business associate, joking about children as part of a deal. His laughter was too loud, too forced. Adana smiled faintly and said nothing, but her heart knew something was wrong. From that night, sleep rarely came easily to her. Adana noticed changes in the household. Obioma's moods shifted often, one day cheerful, the next withdrawn. He left instruction with the housemaid more frequently, and the girl, barely 17, seemed nervous whenever Adana entered the room. One evening, while Adana supervised dinner, the maid muttered, "Madam in Enugu likes her stew with more pepper." She froze immediately, realizing her mistake. Adana's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. She simply dismissed the maid and continued stirring the soup. Inside her chest, anger swelled, but she kept her face calm. The girl had confirmed what the whispers hinted at. There was another woman, another madam. Adana decided to know the truth for herself. When Obioma announced another business trip to Enugu, she said nothing but arranged for her cousin, Chike, to follow at a distance. Adana remained at home, her heart racing with each passing hour. Chike returned 2 days later with the truth she dreaded. He had seen Obioma in a quiet neighborhood, living comfortably with a woman and 2 small children. Not in hotels, not in offices, but in a family home where he laughed, ate, and played as if he belonged. Chike's words pierced her heart like a knife. The man she had sacrificed for had built another life without her. Adana could not believe it until she saw it herself. She traveled secretly to Enugu, disguising herself with a headscarf. From a distance, she watched Obioma carry one child on his shoulders while the woman held another by the hand. They looked like a perfect family. Her stomach churned as she realized the depth of his betrayal. She returned to Onitsha that evening broken. She could still hear the children's laughter in her ears. They were innocent, yet they represented the destruction of everything she thought her marriage stood for. She now carried a burden of knowledge that would change her life forever. Back home, Adana wrestled with denial. Maybe it was temporary. Maybe the woman bewitched him. Maybe he would come back fully to her. She prayed, wept, and tried to convince herself that it was a passing weakness. But each lie she told herself collapsed under the weight of the truth. Anger replaced denial. She remembered the nights she starved so Obioma could save money, the land she sold for his first consignment, the ridicule she endured when people mocked his failures. All of it so he could build an empire and another family. She clenched her fist and swore that he would pay, not with blood, but with what he valued most, his power and wealth. One night, Adana could no longer hold her silence. When Obioma returned from Enugu, she confronted him directly. Her voice trembled, but her words were sharp. I know about her. I know about the children. Do not lie to me anymore. Obioma froze, then forced a laugh. He called it gossip, a misunderstanding. He accused her of listening to jealous women who envied their marriage. His denial was smooth, practiced, and cruel. He looked into her eyes and swore there was no other family. But Adana knew. She had seen too much. In that moment, she decided she would no longer seek the truth from his lips. She would create her own truth, one that would destroy him slowly, silently, and completely. Adana's bed became a prison of restless thoughts. Each night she lay awake, listening to Obioma's steady breathing beside her, wondering if he dreamed of the other woman. She stared at the ceiling, replaying the images of him in Enugu, laughing, holding children that were not hers, living a life she had not been invited into. The nights were long, and silence was heavy. Sometimes she thought of waking him, shaking him, demanding answers. But she restrained herself. The truth was already before her. Confrontation had brought her nothing but lies. Her silence, she realized, was her only weapon. If he would not confess, then she would not warn him of what was coming, when the weight became too much. Adana traveled to her mother's village. The old woman listened quietly, her eyes clouded with age but sharp with wisdom. After a long pause, she said, "My daughter, men are like the river, they flow where they wish. But a wise woman can dam the river, turn it where she wants, without raising her voice." Her mother urged patience, reminding her that open confrontation would only bring shame to the family. If you destroy him, you destroy yourself too. But if you move carefully, you can take everything back without lifting a hand against him. Adana returned to Onitsha with her mother's words echoing in her ears. She would not fight openly. She would strike silently. Sometimes, in her quiet moments, Adana remembered how it had begun. Obioma had been a poor trader with nothing but dreams and determination. She had fallen for his confidence, his laughter, and his ability to see opportunity where others saw failure. She remembered the small room they shared, the nights of roasted yam and palm wine, the promises whispered in the dark. Those memories stand now. The man who once swore she was his only queen had built a throne in another city. The betrayal was sharper because it cut through years of loyalty. Adana wept bitterly, but the tears no longer softened her. Instead, they hardened her resolve. Adana's friends in the market noticed her silence. They teased her, saying, "Men are like goats, they always stray. Just close your eyes and enjoy your position as the main wife." Others whispered that a second family was not unusual for wealthy men. But Adana did not answer. She simply smiled and let them think she had accepted her fate. Inside, her plans were already forming. She watched how the market worked, how alliances shifted, how rivals positioned themselves against one another. She began to see the threads of Obayoma's empire and how easily they could be unraveled. Her friends mistook her silence for weakness, but Adana was weaving something they could not yet imagine. One evening, as the sun sank behind the red roofs of Onitsha, Adana sat in the courtyard, watching the shadows lengthen. She thought of the other woman, of the children, of the years she had given away to a man who had thrown them aside like scraps. A calmness settled over her. She would not confront him again. She would not cry, beg, or curse. No. Her revenge would be quiet, patient, and devastating. Obayoma had built an empire on her sacrifices. Now, she would take it back piece by piece, until he was left with nothing but his shame. Adana knew Obayoma's strength lay in his market network. He had built loyalty among apprentices, suppliers, and wealthy partners. To weaken him, she would need to turn some of those ties against him. She began small, inviting certain traders' wives to her home, offering them food and kindness. She listened more than she spoke, and slowly they shared secrets, the weaknesses of their husbands, the flaws in Obayoma's dealings. She did not mention revenge. Instead, she wrapped her words in generosity. She offered loans to struggling women, gifts to apprentices' families, and small favors that bound them to her. Where Obayoma had built his empire on authority and fear, Adana built hers on quiet loyalty. The web was forming, strand by strand. Every empire has enemies waiting in the shadows. Obayoma's arrogance had already sown resentment among rival traders. Men he had outbid at auctions, partners he had underpaid, competitors he mocked in public, all watched for his downfall. Adana approached them carefully. Through casual conversations, through whispers at weddings and market gatherings, she suggested that Obayoma was growing careless, that he trusted too much in his own invincibility. She never spoke against him directly. Instead, she planted doubts and stepped back. Soon, rivals began sharpening their knives, waiting for the first sign of weakness. The first real move Adana made was financial. Quietly, she began withdrawing her personal savings from Obayoma's accounts. These were the reserves he often relied on when cash flow tightened. He never noticed. Blinded by his confidence, Adana redirected the money into small businesses run by women she trusted. She disguised it as charity, but in truth, she was building her own safety net. With every naira she pulled away, Obayoma's empire grew just a little more fragile. It wasn't long before Obayoma noticed. A shipment delayed because a supplier hesitated. A payment bounced unexpectedly. Apprentices whispered that salaries came late. For the first time in years, Obayoma found himself shouting at accountants, demanding answers. Adana sat quietly, pretending concern. She asked gentle questions, offered sympathetic words, and even suggested prayers for business challenges. He never suspected her hand in the cracks that spread beneath his feet. She was the calm water hiding a deadly current. Despite her secret war, Adana wore the mask of a devoted wife. In public she stood by Obayoma's side, smiling at events, praising him when others questioned his choices. When rivals mocked his growing missteps, she defended him with charm, but in private, she was already 2 steps ahead. She encouraged his reckless spending, suggesting he expand to yet another city, knowing it would stretch his finances thin. Obayoma believed she was his most loyal supporter. He did not realize she was guiding him toward a cliff he could not see. Adana understood that the heart of any business was not its leader but the people beneath him. She began slipping quiet gifts to Obayoma's key manager, Chokudi, a man who had served him faithfully for years. A cow for his daughter's wedding. A loan to cover his mother's hospital bills. Soon, Chokudi was whispering to her what he should have told only Obayoma. With each secret, Adana gained more control. Shipments delayed, invoices misfiled, partners subtly misled, all under Obayoma's nose. He trusted Chokudi blindly, never suspecting his loyalty was already purchased. Onitsha market was not just commerce, it was community, bound by elders who kept order. For years, Obayoma had commanded respect among them. But wealth breeds pride, and pride breeds carelessness. Adana quietly stoked the elders' doubts. She sponsored their events, contributed to community projects in her own name, and ensured the women praised her generosity. Soon, when Obayoma's name arose in meetings, whispers followed, that he was growing arrogant, that he disrespected the very market that made him rich. Adana's strategy was not brute force but poison, slow and invisible. She encouraged Obayoma to mistrust those closest to him. A casual suggestion here, a question there, until he began to suspect his partners of cheating him. Meetings grew tense. Old friends became cautious. Partnerships that had lasted for years began to crumble under suspicion. Adana never raised her voice, never argued. She simply watched as the seeds of distrust sprouted around Obayoma, choking his empire from within. Meanwhile, in Enugu, the other woman grew bolder. She demanded more money for the children's schooling, for rent, for clothing. Obayoma found himself dividing resources between two households. Each demand was a stone added to his already heavy load. Adana knew. She had her cousin's eyes in Enugu, feeding her every detail. The knowledge gave her power. She played the dutiful wife at home, yet smiled inwardly as she watched Obayoma grow weary, stretched between two worlds he could not balance. Obayoma's once confident stride began to falter. He returned home later than usual, his face etched with stress. The apprentices whispered about his temper, his shouting matches with suppliers, his endless complaints about money slipping through his fingers. Adana remained calm, always by his side, never questioning him directly. She offered soothing words, suggesting prayers and patience. He leaned on her comfort, never realizing she was the architect of his crumbling foundation. When Obayoma hinted at slowing down, at consolidating his businesses, Adana softly objected. "You are a man of vision," she told him. "The market expects you to keep growing." Flattered, he listened. She urged him into risky ventures, purchasing land at inflated prices, investing in traders whose loyalty was already bought by her. Obayoma mistook her advice for devotion, never realizing she was guiding him into traps carefully laid by his rivals. Rumors began to ripple through the market. Some claimed Obayoma's accounts didn't balance. Others whispered that he owed more than he admitted. Even the apprentices gossiped that his empire was not as stable as it appeared. Adana never joined in the gossip. She simply listened, nodding, storing every word. Each rumor weakened him, made his partners cautious, and emboldened his rivals. She knew perception was as powerful as truth, and Obayoma's reputation was bleeding out in whispers. Tensions boiled over when Obayoma accused his oldest partner, Okafor, of withholding profits. The confrontation was loud, public, and humiliating. Okafor, once a loyal ally, stormed away, swearing never to work with Obayoma again. Adana soothed her husband at home, but secretly celebrated. She had planted the doubts that led to the quarrel. One by one, Obayoma's stronger supports were breaking away, leaving him to stand alone. The cracks became harder to hide. Loan collectors came knocking. Suppliers demanded cash up front. Obayoma sold off small assets to keep afloat, but the debts grew faster than he could pay them. Adana watched him pace the compound at night, muttering to himself. The once proud man was fraying at the edges, Yet still too blind to suspect his wife's hand in his downfall, despite everything, Adana never dropped her mask. She walked beside him in public, defending him when others sneered, praying loudly for his breakthrough. To the world, she was the epitome of a supportive wife, but behind that mask, her heart hardened further. She had endured betrayal. Now she was the betrayer, and she wore her role with pride. She had no intention of stopping, not until Obioma was stripped of every coin, every ally, every shred of the power he had once used to deceive her. The vacuum Obioma left was quickly filled. Traders he once mocked now took his place at the top. Their warehouses overflowed with goods, their stores brimmed with customers. His apprentices, seeing greener pastures, quietly left him for these rising stars. Adana found the fire by supporting these rivals discreetly. She loaned money to a struggling trader who later undercut Obioma's prices. She whispered to wives of competitors, encouraging them to stand boldly against his arrogance. Slowly, the market that once bowed to Obioma began to forget his dominance. The turning point came when Obioma failed to secure a government contract he had counted on. For years, officials trusted him. But this time, his rivals offered better guarantees. The loss cost him not only money but also prestige. He returned home furious, pacing like a trapped lion. Adana comforted him, rubbing his shoulders, whispering that it was only a temporary setback. Inside, she rejoiced. This was no accident. She had fed information to the rival bidders through her quiet network. Obioma was bleeding, and she was tightening the wound. Customers noticed. Where Obioma's stores once bustled with activity, now they stood half empty. Goods arrived late, prices were unstable, and whispers of his death scared buyers away. His name, once a guarantee of quality, became a warning. Adana sat in her own corner of the market, distributing goods from businesses she had invested in. Her profits grew silently while Obioma's empire withered. Market women praised her wisdom, not realizing she was the very reason her husband's downfall seemed inevitable. At social gatherings, people pitied Adana. They whispered how hard it must be for her, standing beside a man whose fortune is fading. Adana smiled politely, accepting their sympathy. Little did they know, her smile hid triumph. Obioma, blind to her true nature, leaned on her more than ever. He called her his rock, his comfort, his loyal queen. Adana nodded gently, thinking of the woman in Enugu and the children who had stolen her place. If Obioma could build another family, then she could build another future, one without him. In Enugu, the second family grew impatient. The woman complained about money, about promises unmet. The children needed school fees, the rent was due, and Obioma had less to give. He begged her for patience, but her tone grew sharp. She reminded him of the life he had promised her, the comfort she had expected as his hidden wife. The arguments tore at him. He was stretched thin, unable to satisfy either household. Adana knew of every fight. Her cousin's reports filled her with grim satisfaction. The cracks were now visible in both of his lives. To keep up appearances, Obioma began selling property. First a parcel of land, then a truck, then a small warehouse. Each sale was a desperate attempt to keep his empire alive. But assets sold cheaply are assets lost forever. His rivals bought them eagerly, growing stronger as he grew weaker. Adana pretended to question the sales. "Are you sure this is wise?" she asked softly. Obioma snapped at her, defensive and frustrated. She bowed her head, hiding the smile that threatened to spread across her lips. Obioma's health began to show signs of strain. His once broad shoulders slumped, his laughter became rare, and his temper shortened. Adana remained at his side, offering gentle words and warm meals. To him, she was the only person who still believed in him, but her comfort was calculated. The more he leaned on her, the less he looked for the real cause of his downfall. He never imagined that the soft hands that soothed his forehead were the same ones pulling down his empire brick by brick. At the annual market festival, Obioma watched as his rivals took the front seats he once claimed. They paraded their wealth, sponsoring dances and spraying money into the crowd. His name was barely mentioned. Adana was praised publicly for her donations to widows and orphans. People whispered that she had a golden heart, that she remained strong despite her husband's decline. She received blessings from elders, gifts from women, and admiration from youths. In that moment, she knew she had replaced Obioma in the market's heart. The banks were less forgiving. For years, they extended Obioma credit because of his reputation. But with contracts lost and stores empty, their patience ended. Letters arrived, stamped with red. Officers visited, demanding repayment. Obioma scrambled, begging for extensions, promising future profits. But the banks wanted money, not promises. Adana watched the panic grow in his eyes. This was the moment she had waited for. The empire was no longer trembling, it was beginning to collapse. Obioma returned home late one night, his face pale, his steps heavy. He confessed to Adana that he might lose everything if the banks and rivals pressed harder. She embraced him, whispering, "We will survive this storm." But in her mind, she saw the cliff's edge. One more push, one more calculated move, and Obioma would tumble into ruin. Her silence had been patient, her revenge slow. Now, the end was close, and she intended to watch every piece of his empire shatter. The first blow of humiliation came in the market square. A supplier confronted Obioma in front of traders and customers, demanding payment for overdue goods. The man's voice carried, and soon a crowd gathered, whispering, pointing, laughing. Obioma tried to shout him down, but the supplier produced documents. There was no escape. For the first time, Obioma, the man who once commanded respect with a glance, stood powerless, a debtor among equals. Adana watched from a distance, her expression unreadable, her heart quietly singing. When Obioma opened his largest warehouse, he found only shadows. Shelves once stacked with rice, beans, and imported fabrics were bare. Goods had been sold off to pay debts. And suppliers now refused fresh deliveries. The silence was deafening. Apprentices lingered outside, unsure if they still had jobs. Some left immediately, unwilling to sink with a sinking ship. Obioma sat on a stool in the empty hall, his hands shaking. Adana visited him later with a basket of food, comforting him as though he were a wounded child. Back in Enugu, his mistress made a brutal choice. Tired of waiting for money, she moved on to another wealthy trader who promised her comfort. She packed her things, took the children, and left Obioma with nothing but memories. When Adana heard, she smiled bitterly. The woman who thought she had stolen her husband's heart had abandoned him at his lowest. It was a cruel symmetry. He betrayed one wife for another, only to be betrayed in return. The banks acted swiftly. They seized Obioma's house in Enugu, then his farmland on the outskirts of Onitsha. Trucks bearing the bank's logo carried away furniture, leaving his once grand house half empty. Neighbors watched as if attending a festival. Adana walked among them, her face calm, as though she were merely an innocent bystander. But inside, she felt justice tightening its grip. Each item carried away was a reminder of the secret empire Obioma had built behind her back, now crumbling before everyone's eyes. In Igbo society, reputation is wealth. Elders summoned Obioma to account for his debts. Once, he had sat proudly in their council, but now he bowed his head, unable to meet their gaze. They warned him that his behavior shamed the community, that trust was broken. Adana listened silently as elders pitied her, praising her endurance. "She is the true pillar of this family," they said. Obioma sat beside her, diminished, unaware that her silence had guided him to this disgrace. One apprentice, Chike, remained loyal. He had grown up in Obioma's household, and despite the chaos, he refused to leave. Oga, We can rebuild, he said. Obioma clung to those words like a drowning man clings to driftwood. But Chike could not stop the tide. Suppliers refused to trade, banks refused to lend, and even customers crossed the street to avoid Obioma. Loyalty alone could not rebuild a fallen empire. Adana treated Chike kindly, feeding him and thanking him, but she knew his efforts were futile. Obioma stopped walking through the market with his head high. He moved quickly, avoiding eyes, ashamed of whispers. His once booming voice became hesitant, his laughter replaced by muttering. Adana began to handle household expenses openly, paying school fees, buying food, and managing helpers with her own money. People noticed. She is the true strength behind that house, they said. Each word chipped away at Obioma's pride, pushing him further into the shadows. Sleep abandoned Obioma. He tossed on the bed, murmuring about debts, broken promises, and lost glory. Some nights he sat outside until dawn, staring at the dark streets of Onitsha, wondering where he had gone wrong. Adana watched quietly. She offered him tea, prayed aloud for strength, and even massaged his weary shoulders. Yet beneath her calm exterior, she savored every sleepless night he endured. His suffering was her revenge, and it tasted sweeter than words could ever express. As Obioma shrank, Adana rose. Traders began visiting her directly, seeking her wisdom and favor. She controlled small loans, guided new businesses, and funded widows who needed capital. Slowly, people began calling her Nnehia, the mother of the market. It was a title Obioma once dreamed of for himself, as the kingpin of commerce. Now it belonged to his wife, who wore it gracefully. To everyone else, it looked like she was simply filling a void. Only Adana knew it was the final step of her long-planned vengeance. The day came when Obioma could no longer pretend. He confessed to Adana that he was finished, that the banks, the rivals, even fate had conspired against him. His voice cracked as he said, "I have nothing left." Adana held him, her face calm, her heart steady. She whispered, "We still have life. We still have family." But inside, she felt the final stone of his empire crumble. The man who once ruled Onitsha market was no more. Her revenge was complete, silent, devastating, and irreversible. The once lively home fell silent. Servants reduced in number, visitors became rare, and laughter was absent. Obioma sat for long hours, staring at nothing. His booming voice, once feared in the market, was now a whisper of regret. Adana managed the house without complaint. She ensured the children were fed, school fees paid, and dignity maintained. To the outside world, she appeared a strong wife enduring hardship. Inside, she knew she had achieved the justice she longed for. News reached Onitsha that Obioma's mistress had remarried. The new husband, a wealthy trader, provided her the life she once demanded from Obioma. Neighbors whispered, shaking their heads at how quickly she had moved on. Obioma's shame deepened. He could not speak of it, but everyone knew. The betrayal cut deep. He had risked everything for her, only to be discarded. Adana remained silent, offering comfort with a calm face. In truth, she savored the irony of it all. Obioma feared that his children would despise him for his downfall. But Adana shielded them from his failures. She ensured they respected him as their father, even when they saw his weakness. They must not carry your sins, she told herself. Her revenge was for her alone, not for them. And so the children grew with love for their father, though they learned from their mother the value of patience, silence, and hidden strength. Without wealth, Obioma returned to the life of ordinary men. He walked to the market carrying a small basket, buying food with coins instead of bundles. The traders who once bowed to him now barely noticed his presence. At first, the humiliation stung. But slowly, he accepted it. The pride that once made him untouchable was gone. Adana walked beside him sometimes, her head high, her presence a shield. People pitied her more than him, which suited her perfectly. Adana's reputation soared. Women sought her guidance, apprentices came for blessings, and elders respected her wisdom. She became known not only as Eneni Ehia but as a symbol of endurance. Men admired her quiet dignity, not realizing it was forged in fire and vengeance. She never spoke of Obayoma's betrayal. Instead, she spoke of survival, patience, and community. In doing so, she shaped her own legacy, greater than anything Obayoma had ever built. Obayoma rarely attended gatherings. He sat in corners, listening as Adana's name was praised while his own was ignored. The shadow of his former self haunted him. At night, he sometimes whispered apologies to his wife, confessions of guilt. Adana listened, nodding, never revealing how much she already knew. Forgiveness was not her goal, silence was. And silence had been his undoing. Adana began teaching her children more deliberately. She told them stories of trust and betrayal, of strength hidden in silence, of the price of arrogance. She never mentioned Obayoma by name, but the lessons were clear. Power is not in shouting, she said. It is in waiting. It is in knowing when to strike. The children listened, learning from a mother who had turned pain into wisdom. Her revenge was complete, but her legacy had just begun. During the annual festival, Adana was invited to sit among honored guests. She wore a wrapper of deep blue, her head tied high, her smile calm. Dancers sang her name, praising her generosity. Obayoma watched from the crowd, unrecognized, unnoticed. Once, he would have been at the center, throwing money into the air. Now, he was only a shadow among faces. The festival marked the final shift. Adana had become the figure of honor, while he had become invisible. One evening, as Obayoma sat in silence, he asked Adana, "Why did the gods turn against me?" She looked at him, her face serene, and replied, "Perhaps it was not the gods. Perhaps it was your own hands." He nodded slowly, never suspecting her truth. He would die never knowing that his wife, silent and patient, had orchestrated his fall. That was her final victory, the secret she carried alone. Years later, Adana's story became a quiet legend in Onitsha. Women whispered of her patience, her strength, her endurance. Men warned their sons not to underestimate the hearts of women. Adana lived peacefully, her children grown, her influence firm. She never revealed her revenge, for silence had always been her weapon. And so, the wealthy trader's wife became remembered not as a victim of betrayal, but as the queen who destroyed an empire with nothing but silence.